They pulled up in a white SUV, wearing fake uniforms and handing out fines. When they cut down his oak tree, he knew something was off. They weren't real HOA cops, but what he did next made them regret ever showing up. And the way it all ended, no one saw that coming. It started on a hot Saturday morning, the kind where the sun blazes down so hard you can feel it pressing into your skin. Sweat soaked through my shirt as I pushed the mower across the lawn, the steady hum blending with the distant sound of kids playing down the street. That's when the white SUV pulled up at the curb, tires crunching over the asphalt. The doors opened in perfect sync, and two men stepped out like they'd practiced it 100 times. They wore dark blue uniforms with HOA stamped in stark white across their chests, the kind of official-looking gear designed to make you think they had authority. The taller guy, blonde, mid-40s, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who enjoys making other people's lives miserable, marched toward me with a clipboard in hand. His jaw was so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. The shorter guy, built like a bulldog with a scar running down his chin, trailed behind, scanning the yard like he was already calculating damages. "Sir, you're in violation of HOA regulations," the blond man said, squinting like the sunlight offended him personally. I frowned, shielding my eyes with one hand. "I don't live in an HOA." His lip curled. "Well, according to our records, you do." Before I could even process that, the shorter guy pulled out his phone and started snapping pictures of my yard, moving with a cold efficiency that made my skin crawl. "Overgrown grass, uneven edges, and that hedge," he pointed toward the row of bushes lining my driveway. "That's a violation of neighborhood standards." I let out a short laugh. "I cut this lawn every week." "Not good enough." The blond guy's pen scratched across the clipboard with a sense of finality. He tore off a pink slip and handed it to me. "Fine of $500. If you don't pay within 7 days, legal action will be taken." I stared at the slip. "Legal action? Who even are you guys?" I stepped toward them, trying to keep the anger from bubbling over. "HOA enforcement." The blond guy's smile was thin and sharp. "Pay up or prepare for consequences." They turned and walked back to the SUV, completely unfazed by the fact that none of this made sense. I stood there as the engine growled to life and the vehicle rolled down the street, leaving behind the sharp scent of exhaust. I clenched the fine in my hand, the edges digging into my palm. Something didn't add up. My neighborhood didn't have an HOA. I knew it. Every neighbor knew it. And yet they acted like they had the law on their side. Confident. Untouchable. My heart hammered against my ribs as a sick feeling settled into my gut. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I did some digging that night, pacing my living room as the anger simmered beneath my skin. I went through every document I could find. Tax records, neighborhood agreements, local zoning laws, but there was nothing. No official records of an HOA, no board, no registered enforcement agency. I even called the local housing authority. They confirmed it. There was no HOA listed for my neighborhood. None. That's when I started paying attention. Every afternoon, around 4 p.m., the same white SUV would roll through the neighborhood, slow and deliberate. The blond guy would step out, clipboard in hand, while the shorter one hovered nearby, phone out, recording everything like they were building some kind of legal case. They moved with the cold precision of predators circling easy prey. I watched from behind my curtains as they stopped at house after house, handing out slips and making threats. My neighbor, Mrs. Hamilton, sweet, frail Mrs. Hamilton, who'd lived here for over 30 years, was one of their victims. I caught her on her porch one afternoon, clutching her rosary so tight her knuckles were white. "They charged me $1,000 for an unauthorized mailbox," she whispered, her voice shaking. "A mailbox?" I repeated, stunned. They said they'd take me to court if I didn't pay by the end of the week. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't have that kind of money. My stomach twisted. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just a scam. This was extortion. They were targeting the most vulnerable people in the neighborhood, the elderly, the quiet ones, the ones least likely to fight back. But the final straw came 2 days later. I was in my kitchen when I heard the sound of a chainsaw. I ran to the window and saw them. The blond guy standing with his arms crossed while the shorter one, wearing work gloves, guided the chainsaw toward the thick base of the oak tree in my front yard. I ran outside, heart pounding. "What the hell are you doing?" "Tree's a safety hazard," the shorter man said without looking up, voice flat and emotionless. "Get the hell off my property," I shouted, stepping toward them. The blond guy's smirk widened. "It's HOA jurisdiction now." The chainsaw screamed, and my oak tree, the one I'd planted with my father when I first bought the house, crashed to the ground with a sickening crack. Splinters exploded across the grass. My hands curled into fists as rage shot through me like a live wire. They weren't just scamming me anymore. They were declaring war, and I wasn't about to let them win. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. That much was clear. The rage that had been simmering under my skin boiled over into cold focus. I installed cameras around my property, high-resolution ones with night vision, and made sure every inch of my yard was covered. I didn't have to wait long. It was almost too easy. I caught them on camera within 48 hours. Footage of them cutting down trees on other people's property, threatening homeowners with legal action, handing out fines like they were candy. The shorter guy, the one with the scar, seemed to enjoy it the most. He'd laugh when people argued, mocking them as they pleaded for understanding. I even recorded him bragging to the blond guy in front of my driveway. $5,000 last month, he said, grinning like a wolf. These idiot suburbanites will pay anything if you scare them enough. My blood ran cold. That wasn't just fraud. It was calculated intimidation. They were running a racket, exploiting people's fear of legal trouble, targeting the most vulnerable with surgical precision. I compiled everything, timestamps, video files, audio recordings, and handed it over to the police. I expected immediate action. Nothing happened. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. Not a phone call, not a visit. Just silence. It was like they didn't care. Or worse, like someone had told them not to care. That's when I realized I was on my own. So when the white SUV rolled up in front of my house again, I was ready. The blond guy stepped out first, clipboard in hand, that same smug expression on his face. The shorter one followed, phone already out. Business as usual. But this time, I stepped onto the lawn before they could say a word. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and steady. The blond guy's eyes narrowed. "Don't get in our way, buddy." He took a step toward me, shoulders squared. I smiled. "I'm not. The police are." Blue and red lights exploded across the street as 2 patrol cars pulled up, tires screeching. The doors flew open. 2 cops got out, hands on their holsters. "Hands on the vehicle!" one of the officers shouted. Panic flickered in the shorter guy's eyes. He turned and bolted. Bad decision. He tripped over the stump of my oak tree, the one they had cut down, and face-planted hard into the dirt. Blood smeared across his chin as he rolled onto his back, dazed. The blond guy stood frozen, hands half raised, face pale. "You're not real HOA officers," one of the cops said as he stepped forward, cuffs ready. "You're under arrest for fraud, intimidation, and destruction of property." The shorter guy groaned as the cop hauled him to his feet. The blond guy's jaw twitched, but he didn't resist as the cuffs snapped around his wrists. The same smug arrogance he'd always carried was gone now, replaced with wide-eyed disbelief. As they were led to the patrol cars, the shorter guy shot me a venomous look. You think this is over? I smiled. Yeah, I do. It turned out they weren't even licensed contractors, just con artists running a scam. They'd been using fake HOA paperwork to shake down homeowners and threaten them with legal action. When the judge sentenced them to 5 years for fraud and destruction of property, I made sure to be there in the courtroom. The shorter guy glared at me as he was led away in cuffs. You think this is over? I smiled. Yeah, I do. That weekend, I replanted a new oak tree in my yard. My neighbors gathered to celebrate, and Mrs. Hamilton even baked cookies. They're gone for good? She asked. Yeah, I said, patting the tree. And next time anyone shows up claiming to be from the HOA, we'll be ready. The tree stood tall in the sunlight, stronger, just like us.